At Grandma's 95th birthday, my husband leaned in and said, "We need to leave. Now." The way he said it froze my whole body. His voice wasn't panicked, but it had that low, controlled edge I've only heard twice before in our 10 years. Together, both times right before something exploded, metaphorically or otherwise. I glanced around the banquet hall at the white tablecloths and the strings of gold balloons, at Grandma sitting on her chair like a queen, wearing a pink feathered hat my aunt bought just for her. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses, taking pictures. And yet, when I followed my husband's eyes, I saw it too. That subtle shift. That look between my cousin Kayla and my Uncle Rob. They weren't just sharing a joke. There was another language in their expressions, one I recognized from family fights where the plan wasn't for everyone to know. The last time I'd seen it was in 2018, right before my aunt cleaned out my grandma's house while she was in the hospital, selling off furniture and silverware and blaming movers when we asked questions. I slipped my clutch bag under my arm and stood, still smiling like I was going to the ladies' room. My husband pushed his chair back slowly, and together we walked out to the hallway. "What did you see?" I asked. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text from my brother, a guy who never calls unless it's life or death. "Check your account," the message read. "Now." My hand started shaking before I even unlocked my app. $42,500, gone, withdrawn in 3 separate transfers, all in the last 40 minutes. The last one had cleared just as Grandma blew out her candles. I felt my face go hot, not from anger yet, but from that sickening rush when you realize the scope of something midway through. "How?" was all I could say. My husband's jaw was set. "It's them," he said. "Look at the names on the transfers." I did. And there they were. 2 names that made my stomach drop like a stone in water. Kayla's husband, Mark, and an LLC I knew belonged to my Uncle Rob. It wasn't even subtle. No attempt to route the money through some random holding account or delay the withdrawals to avoid notice. They'd done it during the party, in plain sight, counting on me being too distracted to notice. My husband took my phone and started snapping screenshots of every transaction, the timestamps, the account numbers, even the confirmation IDs. "We're not confronting them here," he said quietly, already walking toward the exit. "Why not?" I hissed. "Because they'll deny it, Stahl, maybe even cause a scene, and every minute we stand here is a minute they can move the money again." I followed him out into the cold evening air, my heels clicking on the pavement, my mind reeling back over every interaction I'd had with Kayla and Rob that day. Kayla had been overly sweet, hugging me twice, lingering in conversation, asking if my phone was still the same one, because she needed to send me a link to those travel photos. Rob had been uncharacteristically quiet, almost watchful. We reached the car and I saw my husband already on the phone with the bank's fraud department, giving them the transaction IDs and freezing the account. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, listening to him calmly rattle off details like he was reading from a script. When he hung up, he turned to me. "Funds are locked. They can't move them now without triggering a secondary verification." My heart was still hammering. "So what's next?" He gave a short, humorless smile. "Next, we document everything. And then we make sure they can't touch a cent of yours, or Grandma's, ever again." That last part made me pause. "Grandma's?" I asked. He nodded toward the hall. "You think this was just about you? She's got her accounts linked to that same joint trust your dad set up. If they're in one, they're in the other. We need to pull her statements tonight." I stared back at the glow of the banquet hall through the windows, the silhouettes of my family moving inside, laughing, toasting, completely unaware that I now saw every single one of them differently. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just started the car and drove us away. We didn't go home. Instead, we drove straight to my grandma's house, which was sitting dark and empty because every single relative was still at the banquet. My husband had a spare key, one Grandma had given him herself after my dad's surgery years ago, just in case. The moment we stepped inside, he went straight to her office, where the old wooden desk sat piled with unopened mail and neatly labeled binders. I started pulling statements from the bottom drawer, flipping through pages until I hit the current year. My stomach dropped again. There were withdrawals here too. Smaller amounts, spaced out over months, but all with the same destination. That same LLC of my uncle's. I sat down hard in Grandma's creaky chair, my pulse pounding in my ears. This wasn't just tonight. This had been going on for at least 9 months. My husband took photos of everything, front and back, and then pulled out his laptop to back them up to an encrypted drive. "We'll need to get these to her lawyer," he said without looking up. I froze. "You think she knows?" He finally met my eyes. "I think she suspects, and I think that's why they're trying to drain it now, before she changes the trust." The thought made my skin crawl. We worked for another 40 minutes, in complete silence, only the sound of paper sliding and my husband's camera shutter breaking the stillness. When we finished, he locked the binders back in place exactly how we'd found them. As we left, I looked back at the living room, the photos of family trips, Christmas mornings, graduations, and felt this cold, steady realization settle in my chest. All those smiles had been a cover for something calculated. The next morning, my phone lit up at 7:12 a.m. with a call from Kayla. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, another call, this time from my mom, then my uncle. By the time I finished my coffee, I had 11 missed calls and 6 new voicemails, all variations of the same theme. "There's been a misunderstanding. You're blowing this out of proportion. We were going to put it back." Not one apology, not one acknowledgement that they'd stolen anything. Just spin, and the assumption that I could be talked down like before. But this time I wasn't answering. This time I was building a case. By noon, I had every document labeled, cross-referenced, and stored in 3 different places: the encrypted drive, a cloud account only I controlled, and a physical USB locked in a safe deposit box at the bank. I also had a printed timeline, dates of each withdrawal, amounts, which account it came from, and who it went to. My husband suggested we add screenshots of texts, so I dug through my phone for anything suspicious, like Kayla's, "Just checking," "If you still have the same phone message from the party," or my uncle's random question last month about whether Grandma had sorted out her will yet. When you lay it all out in black and white, there's no ambiguity left. The whole thing read like a playbook. At 2:17 p.m., Grandma called me herself. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, and she asked if I was coming by later. I told her I would, and that I had something important to show her. We agreed to meet at her house at 4. When I arrived, she was already sitting in the kitchen, her checkbook open, a folder of her own statements spread out in front of her. "I know," she said before I could even start. "I just didn't think you'd notice this fast." My throat tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" She sighed, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "Because if I did, they'd know I was onto them. And if they knew, they'd take more before I could stop them." I slid my timeline across the table, and for the first time in the conversation, she smiled. Not a happy smile, more like a satisfied one. "You have the evidence. That's all I needed." Then she reached into her folder and handed me something I hadn't expected. A notarized amendment to her trust, dated 2 weeks ago, removing both Kayla and Rob as beneficiaries and naming me as her financial executor. "I was waiting for the right moment," she said. "Now we have it." That night, while the rest of the family was still calling and leaving increasingly desperate voicemails, Grandma's lawyer filed an emergency freeze on all linked trust accounts. By the time the news reached them, the money was out of their reach forever. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sent Kayla one text. "It's over." And then I blocked her number. 2 days later, the first real pushback began. A certified letter arrived at our house, sent by an attorney representing both Kayla and Rob, claiming that the withdrawals were authorized gifts from Grandma, and that my interference was causing undue family distress. The letter even threatened to pursue legal action against me for harassment if I didn't cease and desist. I read it twice, then set it on the counter without a word. My husband took a photo of it for our records, then called Grandma's lawyer, who actually laughed when he heard the phrasing. "They're panicking," he said, "and they just handed us proof they're lawyering up, which is exactly what we want." That same afternoon, the lawyer filed a formal fraud complaint with the State Financial Crimes Unit, attaching every statement, every screenshot, every timeline entry we'd compiled. I didn't realize until then how airtight our case had become, down to the minute-by-minute matching of party timestamps to account activity. That night, Kayla sent me a Facebook message from a backup account, accusing me of trying to destroy the family and turning Grandma against her blood. I didn't reply. I simply took a screenshot and forwarded it to the lawyer. The next week was a blur of depositions and phone calls. Investigators came to Grandma's house to interview her, and she answered every question with the same clear, unwavering tone. At one point, she even looked directly at the lead investigator and said, "I love my granddaughter because she protects me. My other relatives, they protect their access to my money." That line ended up in the official report. 10 days after, the party, both Kayla and Rob, received notice that they were being formally charged with felony theft and fraud. Their accounts were frozen, their credit cards revoked, and, according to a mutual acquaintance, Rob's business was already bleeding clients after word got out. The family group chat went eerily silent. No more voicemails, no more misunderstanding narratives. Just silence. I can't lie. The quiet was almost unsettling after years of noise. But it was the kind of silence that meant I'd finally cut the cord they'd been yanking on my whole life. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The arraignment was set for the following Tuesday, and while my husband and I had no reason to be there, Grandma insisted we come with her. She wanted them to see her walk in, steady, upright, and not intimidated. When we arrived, Kayla and Rob were already sitting at the defense table, both looking smaller somehow. Kayla's usual blow-dried perfect hair was limp, and Rob avoided eye contact altogether. Their lawyer tried to argue that this was a family dispute that shouldn't be criminalized, but the prosecutor laid out the evidence in a way that left no room for that narrative. Transaction logs, matching timestamps to party photos, text messages asking about my phone and Grandma's will, withdrawals from multiple accounts, including one belonging solely to Grandma. The judge listened, glanced at Kayla and Rob, then denied their request to have the charges dismissed. Outside the courthouse, a local reporter caught us on the steps, asking if we had any comment. Grandma, without breaking stride, simply said, "Stealing from family isn't a misunderstanding. It's theft." That clip made the evening news. The fallout was immediate. Mutual friends began unfollowing them online, neighbors stopped waving, and Rob's business partner announced he was stepping back from operations until the legal matter was resolved. That weekend, I got a single, curt email from Kayla with the subject line, "Closure." It contained one sentence, "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded it to our lawyer, then deleted it from my inbox without another thought. A week later, Grandma signed the final version of her trust documents, with me as sole executor, and sent a notarized copy to the bank, the court, and her attorney's office. That night, she poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one, and said, "We did it." I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just raised my glass and thought about how, for the first time in years, the family's money was finally in safe hands. And so was Grandma. A month later, the trial date was set, but by then, Kayla and Rob's lawyer was already pushing for a plea deal. The prosecutors had everything: the paper trail, the recordings, even a witness statement from a bank employee who confirmed Kayla had been physically present during one of the withdrawals. The offer on the table was restitution in full, plus 3 years probation and a permanent bar from serving as trustee or beneficiary on any estate they weren't directly inheriting from a spouse or parent. It was a humiliating outcome for them, and they knew it. The day they signed, I got wind through a cousin that Kayla had been telling people she only agreed to avoid prison for Grandma's sake. I didn't bother correcting her. The truth was in the court record now, and anyone who wanted to know could read it for themselves. Once the legal dust settled, Grandma decided she wanted one final act to close this chapter. She hosted a small dinner, just me, my husband, and her lawyer, and at the end, she handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $42,500, the exact amount they'd tried to take from me that night. "It's yours," she said. "I told the court to make sure it went straight back to you." I didn't argue, but I also didn't rush to spend it. Instead, I opened a new account under a trust in my name, with Grandma as the only secondary beneficiary. That money, I decided, would be the first stone in a wall they'd never climb again. A few weeks later, we heard through the grapevine that Kayla and Rob had moved 3 towns over, selling their house at a loss to cover legal fees. They left no forwarding address, no goodbye, no apology. And that was fine by me. Because the truth was, I didn't want closure from them. I already had it the moment the judge signed that final order. It was the moment I knew I would never again have to explain, justify, or defend my boundaries to people who had no respect for them. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the only ending this story ever needed. Spring came quietly that year, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I didn't feel the usual knot in my stomach when my phone lit up with a family group text or an unfamiliar number. In fact, I'd muted the entire extended family chat and left it unread for months. Grandma, on the other hand, seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She started hosting little Sunday brunches again, but this time, it was just the people she actually wanted there. No obligatory invites, no pretending to tolerate those who saw her as an ATM. One afternoon, while we were clearing the table, she asked if I regretted any of it. Not one bit, I said, and I meant it. Because even though the process had been messy, exhausting, and in some moments downright ugly, it had also drawn a line in the sand I'd spent years avoiding. The next week, I quietly closed the old joint account my father had set up decades ago, the one Kayla and Rob had used as their entry point, and moved everything to a bank they'd never dealt with. No more shared access, no more just-in-case links. We were done giving them the benefit of the doubt. A few months later, I ran into a distant cousin at the grocery store. She leaned in, voice low, and said, "You know, people still talk about that birthday party." I just smiled. "Good," I said, and walked away. Because I wanted them to remember. I wanted it to be the story that came to mind every time they thought about skimming a little off the top or assuming no one was paying attention. Actions have consequences, and in our family, for the first time, those consequences had stuck. One evening in early summer, my husband and I sat on the porch, the sun setting behind the trees, and he said, "You realize we haven't had to put out a single fire in months?" I nodded. That's because we stopped letting arsonists in the house. And with that, we clinked our glasses, listening to the quiet, the kind of quiet you don't take for granted once you've fought for it. By late summer, the story had fully shifted from something raw and recent to something that lived in the background, like a scar you no longer notice until someone points it out. Grandma's health actually improved. Her doctor even commented that her blood pressure had dropped since removing certain stressors. She laughed and told him it was the best prescription she'd ever filled. We settled into a new rhythm, where holidays were small but warm, birthdays were celebrated without side eyes over who paid for what, and conversations could flow without someone fishing for financial details. Then, one morning in September, a letter arrived from the court. Final confirmation that all restitution payments had cleared and the case was officially closed. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and slid it into the back of my personal file cabinet. It didn't feel like a victory parade, more like locking a door I'd already walked through and wasn't planning to open again. A week later, I got an email from an old family friend who'd heard rumors about the case. She wrote, "It takes a lot of courage to stand up to people who count on your silence. I hope you know you probably changed more than just your own future." I sat with that for a long time, because she was right. This wasn't just about stopping a theft. It was about changing the rules entirely. In our family, silence had always been the currency. But once you break it, there's no going back. And I wouldn't. Not for anything. The first frost came early that year, dusting the lawn in white by sunrise, and I remember standing at the kitchen window with my coffee, watching the light catch on the edges of the grass. For years, mornings like that used to come with a knot in my stomach, wondering what fire I'd be putting out next, what favor would turn into a demand, what new lie I'd be asked to believe. But that frost felt different. The phone didn't buzz. The doorbell didn't ring. And I realized the quiet wasn't just the absence of chaos. It was the presence of peace I'd fought for. Grandma was still sleeping in the next room, safe, her accounts untouched. My husband was reading in the living room, the sound of pages turning soft in the background. Everything that mattered was exactly where it should be. People like Kayla and Rob count on the idea that you won't push back, that you'll swallow the insult, absorb the loss, Keep the family machine running no matter how much it costs you. And for years, I played along. But that night at Grandma's 95th birthday, the moment my husband leaned in and said, "We need to leave. Now." Something shifted for good. I didn't just walk away from the party. I walked away from the version of me who thought keeping the peace was worth my silence. They lost the money. They lost their access. And they lost the one person they thought they could always use without consequence. I'm not their safety net anymore, and I never will be again. So tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? This story was one of those that reminded me exactly why I started this channel in the first place. Because sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones holding the sharpest truth. It's not just about stolen money or legal wins. It's about finally refusing to be the person everyone assumes will just take it. I wrote this, and I'm the creator of Revenge with Sarah. And in the next story, I'll show you what happens when someone who's always been in control loses everything in a single night.